I have been trying to tell this story for a long time. I started journals more than once. I would write for a while. I'd get somewhere close to the truth and then just stop because I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to turn a story into a book. I didn't know how to turn a wound into something useful. And then I had surgery. And for the first time in a very long time, I had nowhere to be, nothing to manage, no one who needed me in that immediate, consuming way that I had always been needed. And something in me said, now. If not now, when? 4 months later, there's a book, a podcast, a business, a platform built from scratch in every spare minute I could find. No television, no downtime, just this. Because I kept thinking about the question that would not leave me alone. Why don't they teach this to everyone? Why did I have to wait until I was 50 to understand what happened to me when I was 5? Why did it take therapy and training and years of healing just to find the language for what I had been living? That frustration became a purpose, and that purpose became this. Welcome to The Fan in the Window, interrupting what we inherit. I'm Tressa Bell. This podcast is about trauma, nervous systems, generational patterns, and the complicated and perfect work of healing. Today's episode is called The Grief of Losing a Role. In the last episode, I talked about what happens when you try to step out of the role that your family system assigned to you, and why the people around you don't always make that easy. Today, I want to go somewhere deeper. Because before you can fully grieve the role, you have to understand something. Letting go of who you were trained to be is a loss, and losses deserve to be grieved. Before I go further, I want to say something clearly. This podcast is not therapy. It's not medical advice. It's not psychological treatment. I am not your therapist. Some episodes include themes related to trauma, family instability, grief, and emotional harm. Please listen at your own pace. If anything comes up in this episode, like strong feelings or memories, please take care of yourself and reach out for support. In the U.S., you can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you're outside the U.S., you can find international hotlines at findahelpline.com. You don't have to navigate this alone. This space is about awareness, not diagnosis. We don't usually think of roles as things that we grieve. We grieve people. We grieve relationships. We grieve the life we thought we would have. But the role? We usually don't even know what we're leaving until we're already gone. And by then, the grief has been sitting there for a while, waiting to be named. In the last 2 episodes, I've talked about the roles children take on in families where chaos is the environment. And what happens when you try to put those roles down. Today, I want to talk about what lives underneath that. The grief, the identity confusion, the strange disorientation of not knowing who you are when you're not the responsible one, or the peacekeeper, or the protector. Because for many of us, the role wasn't just something we did, it was something we were. I want to tell you about a little girl. She is 5, maybe 6 years old. She has long, brown, dark hair. She's thin, and she's wearing that clothing that dates the photograph, that particular style of the 1970s that is unmistakable when you see it now. I know her from the pictures. I know her from the memories that have come back slowly, the way memories always do when you finally give them permission to surface. That little girl is standing at a window. pressing herself close to the glass, straining to hear through the hum of the box van what the adults are saying inside. She has always been curious, needing to know not just what, but why. She needed to understand. That is just who she is. That same day, she learned that the man she called her dad was not her biological father. She didn't have language for what that meant. She just held it, the way children hold things when they cannot yet understand. Quietly, in the body, in the watching, in the becoming more careful. That little girl was me, and she had already taken on her role before she was old enough to know she had one. Psychologists who study identity development have long understood that our sense of self is built in relationship. We learn who we are by learning how we function in the systems around us. For children in stable, nurturing environments, that identity has room to grow and shift. They are allowed to try things, to fail, to change, to discover what they actually want. But for children whose identity forms around a role, whose sense of self becomes inseparable from being the one who manages, who protects, who holds things together, the role doesn't just describe what they do. It becomes who they believe they are. And when you begin to let it go, the question underneath is terrifying. If I am not the responsible one, who am I? I want to say something here that I think matters. The role I played gave me things: competence, resilience, the ability to read a room and manage a situation, to stay calm in chaos, which served me well as a nurse, as a forensic nurse examiner, as someone who could sit with survivors on the worst day of their lives and not fall apart. Those things are not nothing, but the cost was my childhood. The summers, the weekends, the ordinary experiences that other people collected while I was elsewhere, being responsible, being needed, being useful. I hear stories now from people who grew up around me, stories about things that happened, adventures, ordinary days, like just the texture of being young. And sometimes I listen and think, where was I? I was already gone. And here's the thing about grieving a role. You cannot grieve what you never knew you were supposed to have. Part of this work is learning to name what was taken before you even knew it was yours. I remember the feeling of moving into my first apartment, out of my parents' home, into a space that was mine. I remember feeling lighter. At the time, I thought it was just freedom, the ordinary relief of a young adult stepping into her own life. But I understand it differently now. What I was feeling, at least part of it, was the temporary loosening of the role. For a moment, I was not the one responsible for the emotional weather of the home. I was not reading the room before I entered it. I was not anticipating the eruption, positioning myself to absorb what others couldn't. For a moment, I was just a person. I didn't have language for that relief then. I don't know what it was. I didn't know what I was setting down. I just knew something felt different. That is how role relief begins, not with understanding, but with a feeling you can't quite name. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, whose work on grief shaped how we understand loss, described grief not as a straight line, but as a process, non-linear, unpredictable, moving between denial and anger and bargaining and sadness, before something that resembles acceptance arrives. What researchers and clinicians have come to understand is that this process applies to more than just the death of a person. We grieve the loss of relationships, the loss of a version of ourselves, the loss of a version of our lives we thought we would have, the loss of a self we thought we were. And we grieve the roles we were assigned and eventually had to leave behind. Not because the role was good for us, but because it was familiar, because it was ours, because without it, we have to figure out who we are instead. And that is its own kind of work. My mother apologized before she died, and I smoothed it over. Not because I had forgiven her, but because I could not sit with the discomfort in the moment. Because my whole life I had been trained to make things easier for the people around me, even when I was the one that had been harmed. The peacekeeper showed up at her deathbed. The grief about that moment did not come right away. It came later, after the therapy, after the training, after the healing that gave me the language to understand what I had been living. And when it came in layers. Sadness that we never had the chance to have a different relationship. That the version of her I could have known if things had been different was someone I would never get to meet. Guilt that I didn't give her the forgiveness then. That she died not knowing I would eventually find my way there. That I had more time with her than I used well. And frustration, deep, legitimate frustration, that it took me this long, that no one taught me any of this, that I had to wait until I was 50 years old to finally understand what happened to me when I was only 5. Why don't they teach this stuff to everyone? That question used to feel like grief. Now, it feels like direction. I want to say something about forgiveness here because I think it is misunderstood. For me, forgiveness is the moment when I can talk about what happened and not feel the anger rise up in me anymore. That's it. That's the whole definition. Not joy, not warmth toward the person who hurt me, just the absence of that heat, that pressure, that old familiar tightening that meant the wound was still alive. When I talk about my mother now, there is no anger. There's something else, something quieter and more complicated. There is sadness, a particular kind of sadness that comes from missed opportunity, from knowing that the conversation I needed to have with her is one that I can never have now. She apologized on her deathbed, and I smoothed it over because I couldn't sit with the discomfort of receiving it. I wasn't ready. And then she was gone. That sadness doesn't go away. I don't think it's supposed to. But it is a very different thing to carry than anger. Anger is heavy and hot and reactive. Sadness is quieter. It sits beside you rather than inside you. It's the shape of something that mattered. I would rather carry the sadness than the anger. The sadness means I loved her. Here is something important about role grief that I want you to hold. The grief and the relief can coexist. You can be glad to be free of the weight and still mourn the identity that came with carrying it. You can be grateful for the healing and still feel the ache of how long it took. You can forgive and still feel sad about what the forgiveness couldn't restore. These things are not contradictions. They are the fullness of what it means to do this work honestly. Researcher and author David Kessler, who collaborated with Kubler-Ross, has spent decades studying grief. He writes that grief is the price of love, the cost of having cared deeply about something or someone that could be lost. I would add, grief is also the price of awareness, the cost of finally seeing clearly what you could not see before, and the sadness and the guilt and the frustration that come with that clarity. They are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are signs that you are finally awake to what was always there. There is a distinction I want to name here because I think it explains a lot about why grief sometimes arrives so late. There is a difference between surviving and healing. Survival is what most of us did for a very long time, breath to breath, day to day, managing the present moment without much thought for what comes after. Survival doesn't always look like crisis. Sometimes it looks like a perfectly functional life, a job that gets done, children who are fed and cared for, a person who shows up reliably for everyone around them while quietly running on empty inside. Survival is remarkable capacity. It kept many of us alive, literally and otherwise, through things that should not have been survivable. But survival is not the same as healing. And one of the quietest losses of a life shaped by an inherited role is spending decades in survival mode without ever realizing there was another way to live. The grief that comes when you finally step out of the role, that is not weakness. That is the moment you stop surviving and start healing. And those two things feel very different in the body. Here is what I want you to hear today. If you have started to step out of your role, or even just started to see it, and something in you feels like mourning, that is normal. You are grieving a version of yourself that you kept safe for a very long time. You are grieving the relationships that were built around that version of you. You may be grieving the time, the years it took to get here, the things that happened before you understood, the conversations that can no longer happen because the person you needed to have them with is no longer here. All of that grief is real. All of it deserves space. And here is the other thing I know. You did not wait too long. There is no too long. There is only when you were ready, when you had the safety, when you had the language, when you had the stillness, maybe forced upon you, maybe chosen, to finally stop and look clearly. And then you moved. That is not lateness. That is courage. I want to offer you something to sit with this week. Think about the role you played, the one we've been talking about across these episodes. And ask yourself gently, what would you grieve about letting it go? Not what would you gain, not the freedom or the relief of the lighter feeling. What would you grieve? The sense of purpose that came with being needed? The identity of being the strong one? the relationships that were organized around your function, the version of yourself you have been for as long as you can remember. Let yourself name it, without rushing to the relief, without skipping ahead to the better part. Just, what is the loss? Because you cannot fully grieve something that you have never allowed yourself to name. Before we close, if this feels supportive, I want to take just a moment to ground. Grief is heavy, even when it's quiet grief. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind you carry for years before you name it. It lives in the body. So if you're able, just slow down with me. If you're driving, keep your eyes open. But if it's safe, you may want to soften your gaze or let your eyes close. Notice where you are right now. The surface beneath you, the weight of your body being held. Take one slow breath in and then let it out gently. Take another. Let the exhale be a little longer than the inhale. And if anything came up in this episode, a loss you recognized, grief you haven't named, a face, a moment, a version of yourself you haven't thought about in a long time, you don't have to resolve it right now. You can just say to yourself quietly, I see what I carried. I am allowed to grieve it. I am still here. Take one more slow breath. I want to leave you with something before we close. Healing does not always look like arrival. It doesn't look like a moment of clarity so profound that everything rearranges itself into meaning. It looks like a Tuesday where you catch yourself about to slip back into that old role and pause instead. Where you go back to someone after you've gotten it wrong and say the words, that was mine, not yours. I'm sorry. Where you sit with a feeling instead of immediately doing something about it. Healing is the accumulation of Tuesdays. Not a before and after, a direction. And every step in that direction, however small, however imperfect, is interruption. In the next episode, I want to talk about mothers. Specifically, what happens when a mother apologizes. What it feels like to receive it. What it costs when you can't. And what it means to grieve both the apology that came too late and the one that never came at all. If this resonates with you, this is the work I explore deeply in my book, The Fan in the Window. How our nervous systems carry what we inherit, and how we begin interrupting those patterns for the next generation. The book is available now on Amazon. The podcast is available now wherever you listen. A companion book is also in the works. Stay connected at thefaninthewindow.com. If this episode spoke to you, follow the show, leave a review on Apple Podcast, and share it with someone who may need it. That is how we grow this. Thank you for being here. This is The Fan in the Window, interrupting what we inherit. This didn't start with you, but you can interrupt it.